stop the ceremony. The single, guttural command tore through the cathedral's silence like a gunshot. Matteo, the Alpha King, stood at the altar. His eyes entirely black, locked not on his beautiful high-born bride-to-be, but on the shadows near the servants' entrance. The high priest froze, the golden binding ribbon slipping from his trembling hands. A collective gasp choked the elite crowd. Arabella, the intended Luna, reached out, her face pale. "Matteo, what are you doing?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He stepped down from the dais, his heavy boots echoing against the marble. Walking past the gasping nobility, past his outraged council, he stopped before the cowering, scarred servant girl pressing herself against the stone wall. "Mine," Matteo growled, the raw possessiveness in his voice vibrating through the floorboards. "The Omega is my mate." The Blood Moon Pavilion was a masterclass in modern, ruthless opulence. Carved directly into the sheer cliff face of the Blackwood territory, its floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a dizzying view of the churning silver-lit ocean below. Tonight, it was flooded with the scent of expensive perfumes, aged bourbon, and the suffocating underlying musk of apex predators, masking their feral natures in tailored Armani suits and haute couture gowns. It was the night of the Luna ceremony, a night of political consolidation, strategic breeding, and the crowning of Arabella of the Silver Ridge clan as the queen of the Northern Pax. Gemma stood in the darkest corner of the vast room, her back pressed so hard against the cold, unyielding slate wall that she could feel the jagged edges biting through the thin, threadbare fabric of her uniform. She held a silver tray loaded with crystal champagne flutes, her arms trembling from the sheer exhaustion of a 14-hour shift. But the physical ache was nothing compared to the psychological terror of simply existing in this room. She was an Omega. Not just an Omega, but the cursed one. The jagged, obsidian-colored birthmark that branched up the left side of her neck and disappeared behind her ear was a constant, damning reminder of her status. In the old lore, such a mark was said to belong to the betrayers, the omens of famine and pack ruin. In the modern day, it meant she was the pack's ultimate punching bag, the scapegoat for every failed hunt, every bad winter, every stillborn pup. She kept her chin tucked, her long, unruly dark hair plastered over the left side of her face to hide the mark, praying to whatever moon goddess still listened that she would remain invisible. At the center of the room, on a raised dais of white marble, stood Matteo, the Alpha King. Even from 50 feet away, Gemma could feel the sheer, crushing gravity of his presence. He was a monument of a man, built with the terrifying, lean muscle of a predator that had never known defeat. His dark hair was immaculately styled, his jaw sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that commanded the room, a piercing, intelligent amber that seemed to strip away the flesh and see the marrow of anyone he looked at. Tonight, he wore a tailored black tuxedo that barely contained the sheer breadth of his shoulders. He looked bored. Dangerous, but bored. Beside him stood Arabella. She was breathtaking. Spun gold hair, porcelain skin, and a bespoke crimson gown that clung to her curves like liquid fire. She looked at Matteo with a mixture of ravenous hunger and triumphant pride. This mating was the ultimate merger, a corporate acquisition sealed with blood and ancient vows. The high priest, an elder with a face like weathered leather, stepped forward, holding the golden binding cord. The room fell into a hushed, reverent silence. The string quartet in the balcony ceased playing. The only sound was the crashing of the waves against the cliffs far below. Gemma held her breath, trying to steady the rattling glasses on her tray. "Just 10 more minutes," she told herself. 10 more minutes. They are bound. The feast begins, and I can slip back down to the kitchens. "We gather under the watchful eye of the true moon," the priest began, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "To bind these two souls, to unite the North. Alpha Matteo Blackwood, do you accept Arabella Silver Ridge as your fated equal, your Luna, your partner in blood and breath?" Matteo stood perfectly still. His amber eyes stared blankly ahead. And then, he inhaled. It was a sharp, sudden intake of breath, so loud in the silent room that it sounded like a sudden gale. His chest expanded, straining the buttons of his vest. His head snapped up, and the amber in his eyes bled into a deep, endless, terrifying black. The wolf had breached the surface. Gemma's heart stopped. Across the vast expanse of the room, Through the crowd of hundreds of elite werewolves, Mateo's black, feral eyes locked directly onto her. He couldn't possibly be looking at her. She was hidden. She was nothing. She shifted, trying to press herself even flatter against the wall, but his gaze pinned her like a butterfly to a mounting board. A sudden, terrifying heat flared at the base of her skull, a magnetic pull so violent she almost dropped the heavy silver tray. "Alpha?" the priest whispered, faltering. Arabella touched his arm, her perfect smile slipping into a mask of confusion. "Mateo, darling." The vows. "Stop the ceremony," Mateo said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, guttural rumble that rattled the crystal in the chandeliers above. The priest froze. Arabella recoiled as if burned. "Mateo? What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice rising in shrill panic. He ignored her entirely. He stepped off the dais. The crowd parted violently, tripping over their expensive gowns and polished shoes to get out of his path. The Alpha King was marching through his own wedding ceremony, his focus laser-locked on the darkest corner of the room. Gemma's breathing turned shallow, hyperventilating. "Run!" her instincts screamed. "Run, hide. He's coming to kill you. You've ruined the ceremony just by being here." But her legs were filled with lead. The silver tray rattled uncontrollably in her hands until a champagne flute toppled, shattering against the slate floor. The sound was deafening. Mateo stopped inches from her. Up close, the sheer size of him blotted out the light. The scent of him, pine needles, petrichor, and dark, intoxicating ozone crashed over her, suffocating her, making her head spin. He looked down at her. He saw the ragged uniform. He saw the terror in her wide, hazel eyes. Slowly, agonizingly, he reached out a massive, calloused hand and brushed the hair away from the left side of her face, exposing the jagged, black curse mark. Gasps erupted from the crowd behind him. "The cursed one," someone hissed. "Get her out of there." Mateo didn't blink. His thumb gently traced the edge of the obsidian mark. A jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity shot through Gemma's veins at his touch. A feeling of coming home that was so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Mine," Mateo growled, the word tearing out of his throat with ancient, possessive fury. He turned his head slightly, his black eyes sweeping over the horrified crowd, daring a single soul to challenge him. "The Omega is my mate." Chaos did not simply erupt. It detonated. The sophisticated veneer of the modern werewolf aristocracy shattered in an instant. Arabella's father, Lord Silas of the Silver Ridge, let out a roar that shifted halfway into a wolf's snarl. "Blasphemy," he bellowed, surging forward, his eyes flashing yellow. "You shame my daughter for a cursed stray?" "This is an act of war, Blackwood," Gemma whimpered, shrinking back, but there was nowhere to go. The slate wall was unyielding. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable blow, waiting for Mateo to snap out of whatever momentary madness had possessed him and realize his mistake. She was the filth of the pack. She was the omen. Instead of a blow, she felt a heavy, warm weight settle over her shoulders. Mateo had stripped off his custom suit jacket and draped it over her shivering frame. It smelled overwhelmingly of him, a scent that immediately began to short-circuit her panic. Mateo spun to face Lord Silas. He didn't shift. He didn't roar. He simply let his alpha aura expand. It was a physical force, heavy and suffocating as deep water. Several lesser wolves in the front row actually dropped to their knees, choking on the oppressive dominance radiating from the king. Silas halted in his tracks, his chest heaving, his fangs bared, but unable to take another step forward against the sheer pressure of Mateo's will. "You speak of war in my house, Silas?" Mateo's voice was deadly quiet, a silken cord wrapping around the room's throat. "You threaten my mate in my presence? She is a curse." Arabella shrieked from the dais, her perfect facade entirely dissolved into ugly, visceral hatred. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her makeup. "Look at her neck, Mateo. She carries the rot. She is an Omega. A pathetic, crawling thing. The goddess would never pair you with that. The goddess has made her choice," Mateo replied, his tone final. "And I have made mine. The ceremony is over. The Silver Ridge delegation will be escorted to their quarters. We will discuss the dissolution of the treaty tomorrow. You are throwing away the North for a rat." Silas spat, though he took a cautious step back. The council will not stand for this. You will be challenged, boy. Let them try, Matteo said smoothly. He turned back to Gemma. The terrifying, dominant alpha vanished, replaced by a man looking at a starving, terrified creature. Without a word, he reached down, took the silver tray from her rigid, trembling hands, and tossed it carelessly onto a nearby table, sending the remaining crystal shattering to the floor. Come with me, he said softly, offering his hand. Gemma stared at his large, scarred palm. To take it was to step into a different world, a world where she would be the target of every powerful wolf in the country. But looking up into his eyes, which had softened from pitch black back to that piercing amber, she realized she had no choice. The mate bond, dormant and suppressed for years, had been violently awakened. It hummed beneath her skin, pulling her toward him with gravity-defying strength. Trembling, she placed her small, calloused hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and impossibly secure. He led her through the parting sea of the elite. The whispers hissed around them like angry vipers. She felt the searing heat of Arabella's glare boring into her back, a promise of violent retribution. But Matteo walked with measured, unhurried steps, shielding her with his body, his grip on her hand an anchor in the storm. They walked out of the pavilion, into the biting winter air of the estate grounds, and into the heavily guarded alpha wing of the manor. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them, cutting off the sounds of the enraged guests, leaving them in sudden, suffocating silence. Matteo dropped her hand, walked over to a crystal decanter on a mahogany desk, and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He held one out to her. Gemma stood by the door, clutching his oversized jacket around her shoulders like a shield. I shouldn't be here, Alpha, she stammered, her voice raspy from disuse. Please, it's a mistake. The bond. It's confused. I'm a cursed Omega. I sweep the courtyards. Matteo downed his glass in one swallow, slammed it onto the desk, and turned to her. The intensity in his eyes made her breath hitch. There is no mistake, Gemma, he said, using her name. The sound of it on his lips sent a shiver down her spine. I have smelled your scent on the wind for a week. I thought I was losing my mind, searching for a ghost among my own staff. Tonight, when the wind changed in that pavilion, I knew. But I am cursed, she cried out, her hands flying to her neck to cover the black branching mark. Tears finally spilled over her lashes. Lord Silas is right. I will bring ruin to your reign. My own parents abandoned me at the border because of this mark. You have to reject me. For the good of the pack. Matteo crossed the room in 2 long strides, invading her space. He reached up, gently but firmly pulling her hands away from her neck. He didn't look at the mark with disgust. He looked at it with reverence. The pack doesn't know a damn thing about history, he murmured, leaning down until his lips were inches from the pulsing vein on her neck. And neither do you. You are not cursed, Gemma. You are the only thing that can save us. The first week in the Alpha Suite was a psychological torment unlike anything Gemma had ever experienced. In the servants' quarters, she had dealt with physical exhaustion, cold porridge, and the occasional backhand from a cruel superior. But here, in the sprawling, multi-roomed penthouse of the Blackwood estate, she was drowning in a gilded cage. The bed was as large as her old room, draped in silk sheets she was afraid to stain. The food brought to her was rich, decadent, and turned to ash in her mouth. And then there were the staff. The same people she had scrubbed floors beside now entered her rooms with downcast eyes, their postures stiff with resentment and fear. They wouldn't speak to her. When they looked at her, she saw the same disgust as always, now mixed with a toxic dose of envy. The whore who bewitched the king, their eyes said. Matteo was a storm cloud of constant motion. The fallout from the broken ceremony was catastrophic. The Silver Ridge Pack had withdrawn their trade agreements, effectively cutting off the Blackwood territory's access to vital winter supplies. The Northern Council was demanding a hearing to evaluate Matteo's mental fitness to lead. Yet, every night, he returned to the suite. He didn't push her. He didn't demand his marital rights. He simply existed in her space, shedding the armor of his alpha persona piece by piece. One evening, he found her sitting on the floor by the massive fireplace, avoiding the plush velvet sofas. She was wearing one of his old t-shirts, having refused the extravagant gowns his assistants had purchased for her. He unbuttoned his collar, sighing as he sank onto the floor beside her. He smelled of exhaustion, black coffee, and the metallic tang of stress. "You don't have to sit on the floor, Gemma," he said quietly, staring into the flames. "I'm comfortable here," she lied, pulling her knees to her chest. Silence stretched between them, thick, but not entirely uncomfortable. The mate bond thrummed a low, soothing rhythm in the background, a constant hum of mine that she tried desperately to ignore. "The council has formally requested your presence at the winter solstice hunt next week," Matteo said suddenly, his jaw tightening. Gemma's head snapped toward him. "Me? Why? Omegas don't hunt. They don't want an Omega. They want to see the new Luna," he replied, his amber eyes darkening with barely suppressed rage. "They want to parade you in front of the elite. They want to see you fail. They want to prove to the entire territory that you are weak, that my judgment is compromised, and that you are unfit to stand beside me." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced her chest. "Then tell them no. Hide me here. I don't want to be Luna, Matteo. I just want to survive." Matteo shifted, turning fully toward her. He reached out, his knuckles lightly grazing her cheek. She flinched, expecting pain, but leaned into the touch a second later. "I can't hide you," he said softly. "If I hide you, they win. They control the narrative. They will brand you a coward and me a fool. You have to ride out with me, Gemma. You have to let them look at you. They'll see a scarred, broken thing," she whispered, a tear escaping down her cheek. "I don't know how to ride a warhorse. I don't know how to hold a bow. Arabella has been training for the hunt since she was a pup. You won't be competing with Arabella," Matteo said, his voice hardening into granite. "You will be riding beside me, and I will burn the forest to the ground before I let anyone touch a hair on your head. But you must show them you are not afraid of them." "But I am afraid," she cried, her voice cracking. "I've been afraid every day of my life." Matteo leaned closer, his forehead resting gently against hers. The proximity was overwhelming. "I know," he breathed. "I know, my brave girl. But you don't have to be afraid alone anymore. The curse they speak of, it's a lie. I will prove it to them. Just trust me for 1 week." She closed her eyes, breathing in his scent, feeling the terrifying, beautiful weight of his promise. "Okay," she whispered into the firelight. "Okay." The preparation for the hunt was grueling. Matteo assigned his most trusted guard, a grizzled, one-eyed veteran named Thorn, to give Gemma basic riding and archery lessons. Thorn was gruff, impatient, but fiercely loyal to the Alpha, and surprisingly, he didn't treat Gemma with disgust. He treated her like a raw, incompetent recruit, which was a massive step up from being treated like a curse. "Keep your elbows up, girl," Thorn barked, swatting her arm with a riding crop as she struggled to pull back the heavy recurve bow in the training yards. "You're drawing with your shoulder. Use your back. If a rogue wolf leaps at you, you won't have time to think about your posture." Gemma gritted her teeth, her muscles screaming in protest, and pulled the string back to her cheek. She let it fly. The arrow missed the straw target entirely, sinking into the wooden fence behind it. She dropped the bow, humiliated, her chest heaving. "Better," Thorn grunted, much to her surprise. "You didn't close your eyes this time." As she walked back toward the manor to clean up, taking a secluded path through the estate's sprawling hedge maze to avoid the staff, she heard voices. She froze, pressing herself into the shadows of a large oak tree. "He is weak, Silas. I saw it in his eyes. He is completely distracted by that filthy creature." It was Arabella. Her voice was sharp, venomous. Gemma peeked around the trunk. Arabella was standing in a small clearing within the maze, wearing a luxurious fur-lined coat, speaking with her father. "Patience, my dear," Lord Silas soothed, though his tone was laced with malice. "The solstice hunt is the perfect theater. Accidents happen in the deep woods all the time. A stray arrow, a spooked horse throwing its rider down a ravine. Without the Omega, his bond snaps. He will be thrown into a blood madness, and the council will have no choice but to remove him. Then, I step in as regent, and you, my daughter, will have your pick of the northern alphas." Gemma slapped a hand over her own mouth to stifle a gasp. They weren't just planning to humiliate her, they were planning to murder her to stage a coup against Matteo. She took a step back, intending to run to Matteo, but a dry twig snapped under her boot like a firecracker. Arabella and Silas whipped their heads toward the sound. Arabella's eyes narrowed, sniffing the air. Her lips curled into a cruel smile. Well, it seems the little rat is eavesdropping. Before Gemma could run, Arabella shifted. It wasn't a full transformation, but her nails elongated into razor-sharp claws, and her eyes flashed gold. In a blur of speed, she crossed the clearing and slammed Gemma against the oak tree. The breath left Gemma's lungs in a violent rush. "You think you've won?" Arabella hissed, her claws digging into the fabric of Gemma's coat, piercing the skin of her shoulders. "You think because he marked you as his, you are safe? You are nothing but a stain on his legacy. You won't survive the hunt, Omega. I will personally tear out your throat and leave you for the scavengers." Gemma struggled, but the highborn wolf was vastly stronger. The scent of Arabella's aggression was choking her. "Let her go." The voice was not loud, but it carried a subharmonic frequency that made the very ground vibrate. Arabella froze. Silas blanched. Matteo stepped out of the shadows of the maze. He wasn't walking. He was stalking, his body coiled with lethal tension. His amber eyes were fixed on Arabella's hands, which were still pinning Gemma to the tree. "Alpha," Silas stammered, stepping forward, trying to defuse the situation. Arabella was merely reprimanding a servant for eavesdropping on private conversations. Matteo ignored him. He didn't even look at Silas. He stopped 3 feet from Arabella. "Remove your hands from my mate," Matteo said softly. "Or I will remove your hands from your arms." Arabella sneered, trying to maintain her bravado. "She is a spy, Matteo." Before Arabella could finish the sentence, Matteo moved. It was too fast for Gemma to track. 1 second Arabella was pinning her. The next, Arabella was thrown backward, crashing through a thick hedge and sprawling onto the cobblestones. Matteo stood in front of Gemma, his broad back shielding her entirely. He let out a low, terrifying snarl directed at Silas. "If I see either of you within 50 yards of her again, treaty or no treaty, I will kill you both where you stand. You are guests in my home. Act like it, or you won't leave it alive. Now get out of my sight." Silas, trembling with a mixture of fury and terror, hurried to help his daughter up. Arabella glared at Matteo, her face scratched from the branches, before they both fled down the path. Matteo didn't turn around immediately. His chest was heaving. Slowly, the tension drained from his shoulders. He turned to Gemma. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough. Gemma shook her head, tears streaming down her face, not from pain, but from the overwhelming adrenaline crash. They plan to kill me at the hunt," she blurted out. "I heard them. They want to stage an accident to drive you mad so Silas can take over." Matteo's jaw clenched so hard a muscle ticked in his cheek. He reached out, gently pulling her into his chest. She buried her face in his coat, breathing him in. "I know," he murmured, his hand stroking her hair. "I've known since yesterday. My spies are everywhere." Gemma pulled back, looking up at him in shock. "You knew? Then why are we still going? Why are you risking this?" Matteo looked down at her, his expression a complex mixture of sorrow and fierce determination. "Because, Gemma, treason is difficult to punish without proof. They need to make their move so I can cut the rot out of this pack, once and for all. I am using myself as bait." He paused, his eyes softening. "And I am trusting you to stand beside me when the trap springs." The morning of the winter solstice was brutally cold. A thick layer of fresh snow blanketed the blackwood forest, turning the ancient pines into towering, silent ghosts. The air was crisp, biting, and tasted of pine needles and impending violence. Over 100 wolves, the elite of the northern packs, gathered in the courtyard. They rode massive, heavily muscled war horses bred for the harsh terrain. The atmosphere was festive on the surface, filled with the blowing of horns and the passing of silver flasks. But underneath, it was a powder keg of political tension. Gemma sat atop a steady, reliable gray mare. Matteo had forbidden Thorn from giving her a spirited mount. She was dressed in custom-fitted leathers lined with black fur, a heavy cloak draped over her shoulders. She felt like an imposter playing dress-up. Every eye in the courtyard was on her, judging her posture, her pallor, the way she clutched the reins with white-knuckled terror. Matteo rode a massive, midnight black stallion. He was a terrifying vision of martial power, a longsword strapped to his back, a compound bow resting across his saddle. He rode up beside her, his thigh brushing against hers. "Stay close," he muttered, his eyes scanning the crowd. He locked eyes with Lord Silas, who offered a mocking, respectful nod. Matteo didn't return it. The horns blew a long, mournful note, signaling the start of the hunt. The objective was traditional: track and take down a massive elk to provide the symbolic first meat of the winter feast. But everyone knew the real game was political maneuvering in the deep woods. For the first hour, the ride was peaceful, if freezing. Gemma kept her mare practically glued to Matteo's stallion. Thorn rode behind her, a silent, deadly shadow. As they pushed deeper into the jagged, mountainous terrain known as the Dagger Peaks, the main hunting party began to splinter. Groups fanned out, following different tracks. The snow was falling heavier now, reducing visibility to a few dozen yards. "Alpha," Thorn called softly from behind. "We are losing the main column." The Silver Ridge riders broke off to the east, but their trackers are circling back behind us. Matteo nodded. "I know. They're trying to isolate us. Let them." Gemma's heart hammered against her ribs. She gripped her bow, feeling completely useless. Suddenly, a loud, piercing whistle echoed through the trees. Chaos descended instantly. From the snow-draped branches above, 4 massive wolves leaped down, not in human form, but fully shifted into their monstrous, primal states. They were rogues, mercenaries hired by Silas, their fur matted, their eyes filled with bloodlust. Matteo's stallion reared, screaming as a gray wolf slashed at its flank. Matteo was out of the saddle before the horse hit the ground. Shifting midair, he landed in the snow not as a man, but as a monstrous, pitch-black dire wolf, easily a head taller than the attackers. He clamped his jaws around the throat of the first rogue, snapping its neck with a sickening crunch. "Ride!" Thorn screamed at Gemma, drawing his sword to parry a leaping rogue in human form who had dropped from the trees. Gemma's mare panicked, bolting forward into the dense, blinding snow. Gemma held on for dear life, ducking under low-hanging branches, the sounds of vicious snarling and clashing steel fading behind her. She didn't know how long the horse ran. The snow was a blinding white sheet. Finally, the exhausted mare stumbled over a hidden root and collapsed, sending Gemma tumbling into a deep snowbank. She scrambled to her feet, gasping for air, snow packing into her collar. She was entirely alone. The silence of the forest was absolute, broken only by the ragged sound of her own breathing. She drew her bow with shaking hands, nocking an arrow just as Thorn had taught her. She spun in a slow circle, straining her eyes against the whiteout. A twig snapped. Out of the blizzard, a figure emerged. It wasn't a wolf. It was Arabella, in human form, holding a sleek, modern hunting crossbow. She looked perfectly calm, her blonde hair pristine against the white landscape. "You see, Omega," Arabella said, her voice carrying easily through the quiet air. "The woods are dangerous. So easy to get lost. So easy to be mistaken for prey." Arabella raised the crossbow, aiming squarely at Gemma's chest. Gemma drew her bowstring back. Her arms screamed. Her hands shook violently. She knew she couldn't hit Arabella. She knew she was going to die here, alone in the snow. "You're a coward, Arabella," Gemma choked out, her voice remarkably steady despite her terror. Arabella laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "And you are dead." She pulled the trigger. The bolt hissed through the air. Gemma squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the impact. It never came. A blur of black mass slammed into the snow between them with the force of a meteor. Matteo, still in his massive wolf form, had intercepted the bolt. It struck deep into his thick shoulder muscle. He let out a roar that shook the snow from the trees, shaking off the impact. Arabella screamed, dropping the crossbow, and turned to run. Matteo didn't pursue her. He shifted back to human form instantly, his clothes torn, blood pouring from the wound in his shoulder, mixing with the dark blood of the rogues he had already killed. He ignored the bolt entirely, falling to his knees in front of Gemma, his hands frantically gripping her shoulders, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt? Did she hit you?" he demanded, his eyes wild, his pupils blown wide with adrenaline and fear. Gemma dropped her bow, falling to her knees into his chest, wrapping her arms around his neck, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm okay. I'm okay. You're bleeding, Matteo." "It's nothing," he breathed, burying his face in her hair, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I've got you. I've got you." The return to the manor was a grim procession. Thorn had survived the ambush with a nasty gash across his face, dragging the bodies of 2 Silver Ridge loyalists behind his horse as proof of the treason. Matteo refused to let the pack healers touch him until he had carried Gemma up to their suite himself. He locked the doors, barring entry to everyone except his most trusted physician, an old woman named Alara, only when Gemma was sitting on the edge of the bed, stripped of her wet outer layers and wrapped in thick blankets. Did Matteo allow Alara to pull the crossbow bolt from his shoulder? He didn't even flinch as she stitched the torn muscle, his amber eyes fixed entirely on Gemma. Once Alara left, leaving behind a tray of salves and painkillers, the room fell into a heavy, charged silence. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Gemma stared at the black mark on her neck in the reflection of a silver mirror on the vanity. The events of the day crashed over her. She had almost died. Matteo had taken a bolt meant for her. "Why?" she asked, her voice a hollow whisper. She turned to look at him. He was leaning against the mantel, a fresh bandage stark white against his tanned skin. "Why go to all this trouble? Why take a bolt for a cursed Omega? Arabella would have been a perfect Luna. She's strong. She's fearless. I am nothing." Matteo pushed himself off the mantel and walked slowly toward the bed. He sat down beside her, the mattress dipping under his weight. He didn't answer immediately. He reached out and, with incredible gentleness, traced the black, branching mark on her neck. "You think this is a curse," he said softly, his eyes tracing the lines. "Your parents abandoned you because they thought it was a curse. The pack abuses you because they fear it." "It is a curse," Gemma insisted, pulling away slightly. "It brings death. It brings life, Gemma," Matteo said, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "Do you know anything about the history before the Alphas ruled? Before the territories were divided by blood and borders?" Gemma shook her head. "Omegas weren't taught history. They were taught how to scrub stone and keep their heads down. Hundreds of years ago," Matteo began, his eyes dark with old knowledge, "there was a bloodline among our kind. They weren't fighters. They weren't alphas. They were the seers, the healers, the empaths. They could feel the earth. They could sense disease before it struck. They could heal wounds with a touch and calm, a blood-mad wolf with a whisper. They were the true spiritual leaders of the packs, and they bore a mark." Gemma's breath hitched. Her hand flew to her neck, a branching mark, black as obsidian, resembling the roots of the ancient world tree. Matteo continued. "My grandfather. He was a cruel man. He feared the seers. He feared their influence over the people. He wanted absolute military control. So, he ordered them slaughtered. He wiped out the entire bloodline and rewrote the history books. He turned their sacred mark into a symbol of a curse, an omen of bad luck, so that if any descendants ever popped up, the pack would kill them or cast them out themselves." Gemma stared at him, her mind spinning. "You're lying. That's a myth. I found the original texts in the restricted archives 5 years ago," Matteo said. "I knew the truth. When I saw you in that courtyard years ago, scrubbing the stones, I saw the mark. I knew what you were. I knew what they had done to you. I watched you from afar, trying to figure out how to protect you without alerting the council to who you really were." "Then why the ceremony?" she asked, tears welling in her eyes. "Why were you going to marry Arabella?" "Politics." He spat the word like poison. "I needed the Silver Ridge army to secure the northern borders against the rogues. I thought I could make the sacrifice. I thought I could bind myself to Arabella for the good of the territory, and keep you safe as a servant. But when the priest began the binding," he leaned in, his amber eyes burning with an intensity that made her soul vibrate. The wind shifted. I smelled your fear. I smelled your despair. And the wolf inside me revolted. It shattered the political chains. My wolf recognized what I had been trying to deny. You are my fated mate, Gemma. Not just a seer. Mine. Gemma let out a choked sob. The years of abuse, the self-hatred, the bone-deep belief that she was toxic and broken it all rushed to the surface, battling against this new, impossible reality. She reached out, her trembling fingers lightly touching the bandage on his shoulder. I don't know how to be a seer. I don't know how to heal. I don't know how to be a Luna. Matteo caught her hand, pressing his lips to her scarred knuckles. You don't have to know yet. You just have to let me love you. Let me protect you. Until you are ready to protect us. For the first time in her life, Gemma didn't pull away. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady, powerful beating of his heart. The mate bond, no longer suppressed by fear, flared brilliantly to life, wrapping around them both in a warm, unbreakable embrace. The fallout from the ambush was immediate and explosive. Matteo dragged the bodies of the Silver Ridge mercenaries into the Grand Hall the next morning, throwing them at the feet of the Northern Council elders. Silas denied everything, claiming the rogues acted independently, but the tension was at a breaking point. The council, composed of 5 ancient, scarred alphas who viewed Matteo as a dangerous radical, convened an emergency tribunal. The tribunal room was a circular amphitheater of dark oak and black marble. The air was thick with the suffocating pressure of a dozen powerful alphas in one room. Gemma stood beside Matteo in the center of the floor. She was terrified, but she held her head high, wearing a simple, elegant black dress that left her neck, and the mark, entirely visible. Matteo stood beside her, his presence a towering wall of protective fury. You bring wild accusations against Lord Silas. Alpha Blackwood, Elder Corvin, a wolf with a missing jawline rasped. And you present this cursed Omega as your Luna. You have brought chaos to the north. You broke a sacred vow at the altar. I broke a political contract to claim my fated mate, Matteo countered, his voice booming through the hall. And Silas attempted to assassinate her, and me, in the woods. His daughter confessed it before firing a bolt into my shoulder. Lies, Silas roared from the gallery. He is bewitched by that creature. She has poisoned his mind. Look at her mark. She is the rot that will consume us all. We have seen enough, Elder Corvin decreed, banging a heavy wooden gavel. Matteo Blackwood, you are deemed compromised. Your bond with this Omega is unnatural and a threat to the stability of the Pax. You have 2 choices. Exile the Omega beyond the Deadlands, or forfeit your Alpha command, and face a blood challenge from the Council. A deathly silence fell over the room. To forfeit the command meant a fight to the death against the Council's champion. To exile her meant sending her to certain death in the freezing wastelands. Matteo didn't hesitate for a fraction of a second. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up and began unbuttoning his coat. Matteo, no, Gemma whispered, grabbing his arm. They'll kill you. There are too many of them. Let them try, he growled, letting the coat fall to the floor. He rolled up his sleeves, exposing his scarred forearms. He looked up at the council, his eyes bleeding into that terrifying pitch-black void. I accept the blood challenge. Send down your champion. Send down all of them. Silas smiled, a greasy, triumphant smirk. He gestured to the back of the room. The massive iron doors opened, and a monstrous figure stepped through. It was a giant of a man, covered in tribal tattoos, a known pit fighter from the Eastern Blood Rings. He wasn't just a wolf. He was a killing machine, heavily hopped up on synthetic stimulants. Gemma looked at the giant, then at Matteo's bandaged shoulder. He was injured. He was exhausted. He would fight. He would fight like a demon, but he would die. No. A sudden, strange sensation flared in Gemma's chest. It wasn't panic. It was a deep, resonating hum, originating from the mark on her neck. It felt like a dormant volcano waking up. She closed her eyes. Suddenly, the room didn't feel like a room. It felt like a web of pulsing energies. She could feel Matteo's fierce, protective rage. She could feel the pit fighter's chaotic, drug-induced bloodlust. And she could feel Lord Silas. She opened her eyes and looked at Silas in the gallery. She didn't just see him. She felt him. She felt the hollow, rotting ambition. She felt the crippling cowardice hiding beneath his bluster. But most importantly, she felt the specific, sharp memory of him handing a pouch of silver to the rogues in the woods. It was an empathic surge, a sudden unlocking of her bloodline's ancient power. Before Matteo could step forward to meet the champion, Gemma walked past him. "Gemma, step back," Matteo barked, reaching for her. She ignored him. She walked directly toward the center of the room, raising her hand and pointing directly at Lord Silas. "You paid them behind the butchery in the lower ward," Gemma's voice rang out. It wasn't her usual timid whisper. It carried a strange, echoing resonance that made the hairs on the back of everyone's neck stand up. "You gave the scarred rogue a pouch of silver and a vial of synthetic wolfsbane. You told him to make sure the Alpha suffered before he died." Silas paled dramatically. "What is this witchery? Silence her. She is a seer," Matteo bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, finally revealing the truth to the entire council. "Look at the mark, you blind fools. It is the bloodline of the ancient healers, the empaths you thought were a myth. She is reading his guilt." The room erupted. The elders stood up in shock. Gemma didn't stop. The power was flowing through her now, uncontainable. She turned her gaze to the giant pit fighter. She didn't feel fear. She felt his pain, the chemical agony in his veins, the years of abuse. "You don't want to fight for him," she said softly to the giant, her voice carrying a soothing, harmonic frequency. She projected a wave of absolute calm, a soothing mental blanket that crashed against his chemically enhanced rage. "You are in pain. Stop fighting." The giant froze. He blinked, the red haze fading from his eyes. He looked at Gemma, confused, then looked at his trembling hands. The stimulants in his system seemed to instantly burn out, neutralized by the empathic wave. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head, groaning. He refused to fight. The entire council stared in absolute, terrified awe. The cursed Omega had just neutralized their champion without throwing a single punch. Gemma turned back to Silas, her eyes glowing with a faint, ethereal silver light. "Your coup has failed, Lord Silas. The pack sees you." Matteo didn't waste the moment of stunned silence. He surged forward, grabbing Silas by the throat, hauling him over the gallery railing and slamming him onto the marble floor. "The challenge is void," Matteo snarled to the council. "Silas is guilty of treason. The Silver Ridge Pack is hereby stripped of its voting rights, and its lands will be annexed. If anyone else wishes to challenge my Luna, step down now." No one moved. The elders sat back down, their faces pale, staring at the small woman with the black mark on her neck, who possessed a power they couldn't even comprehend. The winter passed, and the ice slowly thawed, both in the territory and within the pack's dynamic. The revelation of Gemma's true lineage sent shockwaves through the northern packs. The fear of her curse didn't vanish overnight. Prejudice was a stubborn weed, but it was replaced by a wary, almost reverent awe. The elders, realizing how close they had come to destroying themselves from the inside out, formally recognized her as the seer, the first to walk the grounds of Blackwood in over 3 centuries. Gemma did not transform into a warrior queen. She didn't wield a sword or bark orders in the courtyard. Instead, she reshaped the pack from the inside out. Her first act was to visit the holding cells where the pit fighter, abandoned by Silas and suffering severe withdrawals from the combat stimulants, was chained to a wall. The guards warned her against entering, but Gemma simply waved them off, flanked only by Matteo's quiet, looming presence. She knelt beside the massive, tattooed man, ignoring the feral snarls he directed at her. Removing her gloves, she placed her bare hands over his thundering, arrhythmic heart. The empathic pull was instantaneous. She absorbed his jagged agony, the chemical fire ravaging his veins, and carefully, meticulously began to filter it through her own grounded energy. To the astonishment of the guards, the giant's tremors ceased. His breathing leveled out. When he opened his eyes, the feral red haze was entirely gone. Weeping openly, he swore fealty not to the Alpha King, but to the seer who had given him his mind back. From that day forward, Gemma became the heart of the territory. She used her empathic abilities to identify illnesses before they became outbreaks. She sat with traumatized rescue wolves, using her calming aura to pull them back from the edge of madness. Most importantly, She reorganized the pack structure, dismantling the brutal hierarchy that had tortured her for years. She ensured that the Omegas, the very people she used to scrub floors beside, were fed, educated, and protected. The pack members, who had once spat at her feet, now parted respectfully when she walked through the lower wards. They came to her with their disputes, their grief, their fears. She didn't rule with an iron fist. She ruled with an open hand, untangling the generational trauma that had made the Northern Pack so ruthless in the first place. While Mateo remained the impenetrable shield of the territory, ensuring no rogue or rival pack dared cross their borders, Gemma became its unyielding soul. Chapter 9. The Sacred Vow. It was mid-spring when the true final mating ceremony took place. The snow had completely melted from the Blackwood valleys, replaced by vibrant bursts of wildflowers and the rich, loamy scent of new growth. There was no sterile, glass-walled blood moon pavilion for this union. The ceremony was held deep in the ancient forest, in a sacred clearing surrounded by towering redwoods, illuminated entirely by the light of a massive, silver full moon. There were no expensive Armani suits, no haute couture gowns, no politicians plotting in the shadows, and no string quartets, just the pack, gathered in a massive, breathtaking circle under the canopy of the trees. Every member, from the highest-ranking enforcer to the youngest pup, stood shoulder to shoulder. Gemma stood in the center of the clearing, waiting. She wore a simple white dress woven from natural fibers, leaving her arms and shoulders bare. Her dark hair was pulled entirely to the side, intentionally displaying the beautiful, branching black mark on her neck for all to see. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer a cursed thing in the shadows. The crowd parted, and Mateo stepped into the moonlight. He was shirtless, wearing only ceremonial leather breeches. The silver scars of his past battles were painted luminous by the moonlight, telling the story of a king who had fought for everything he had. But the intense, terrifying Alpha looked at her with such profound, unmasked adoration that it made the surrounding wolves instinctively lower their heads in deep respect. He stopped a breath away from her. The mate bond hummed between them, practically visible in the charged spring air. "I claim you. Not as a political pawn, not as a duty," Mateo spoke, his voice deep, rumbling, and carrying effortlessly to the very edges of the clearing. He reached up, his calloused thumbs gently wiping away a stray tear that escaped Gemma's eye. "I claim you as my heart, my equal, my seer, my Luna." Gemma looked up into his amber eyes. She felt the overwhelming, blinding light of his love pouring through the bond, washing away the last, stubborn shadows of her traumatic past. She wasn't just safe, she was revered. "I accept your claim," she replied, her voice remarkably steady, ringing with the strange, harmonic frequency of her bloodline. "I bind my spirit to yours, to heal when you bleed, to guide when you are lost, to protect this pack as fiercely as you protect me." Mateo leaned down. The entire forest fell into an absolute, breathless silence. He didn't kiss her lips. He turned his head and pressed his fangs gently, precisely, into the junction of her neck and shoulder, right at the base of the ancient obsidian mark. Gemma gasped as the mating bite set. It wasn't painful. It was an explosion of pure, golden light behind her eyes. The bond snapped perfectly into place, a permanent, unbreakable tether fusing their souls together. But because of who she was, the bond didn't stop with them. A physical wave of empathic energy, warm and absolute, pulsed outward from the bite. It washed over the gathered pack like a physical breeze, connecting every single wolf in the clearing to their Luna, solidifying their unity in a way no political treaty ever could. Mateo pulled back, his eyes glowing a vibrant, supernatural amber. He looked down at his mate, the cursed Omega who had ultimately saved them all. He threw his head back and let out a long, triumphant howl that shattered the stillness of the night sky. A second later, Gemma joined him, her voice intertwining perfectly with his. Then Thorn added his voice. Then the elders, then the Omegas, until the entire forest vibrated with the earth-shaking song of a united, unbreakable pack led by a king who had the strength to break the rules, and a queen who possessed the power to heal the world. True power isn't found in perfect pedigrees, flawless appearances, or ruthless dominance. It lies in the courage to look past societal labels, and recognize the hidden strength in those the world has discarded. Matteo and Gemma's journey reminds us that our deepest wounds and perceived curses are often the very source of our greatest, most transformative gifts. Only when we lead with empathy and protect the vulnerable do we find our true pack. If you were captivated by Matteo and Gemma's story of defying destiny and fighting for true love, please give this video a like. Share it with your fellow romance and fantasy lovers. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more epic, cinematic stories delivered straight to your feed. Let us know in the comments what kind of story you'd like to hear next.